Some evils don't just hide in the shadows, they live beneath our feet. In a forgotten Texas town, where the sun bleaches the bones of abandoned buildings and the wind carries the scent of dry earth and gasoline, a nightmare has been festering for decades. It begins with a quiet boy named Michael, a stack of baby wipes, and a storm drain that holds secrets darker than anyone could imagine. But this is not just a story about a killer. It's about the thing that made him. The thing that whispers from the pipes. The thing that has been hungry for a very, very long time. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this video. We read every single comment. Even though he was only 13 years old, Michael was a shy and humble young man with sunken eyes that appeared to conceal secrets that were far older than his years. He entered a little grocery shop in a desert town in Texas on a daily basis, in accordance with a set schedule, with his rucksack slung over one shoulder and his actions being so perfect that they seemed almost mechanical. Sarah, who worked at the shop and had keen eyes, couldn't help but draw attention to him. The manner in which he walked was peculiar. He seemed to be too calm and too attentive for a child of his age category. Afterwards, there came the purchases, which included baby wipes. Every day, not just one pack, not even 2 packs, but at least hundreds of packs. One would wonder what a kid of 13 years old could possibly need with so many wipes. It was clear to her intuition that something was very wrong with the situation. Consequently, Sarah engaged in a risky behavior on a certain day. After Michael's payment in crumpled currency and his departure with his typical face of blankness, he was followed by her. As she followed the route, she arrived at the outskirts of the town, where the number of buildings began to decrease and the air smelled of dry dirt and gasoline. In the vicinity of an abandoned auto repair business, Michael came to a halt. The windows of the building were boarded up, and the lot was filled with rusting automobile parts. She was huddled in a crouching position behind a collapsing brick wall, and her heart was pounding in her throat. Then she discovered it. Michael was quite meticulous in his motions as he squatted down next to a storm drain. He took out the baby wipes and started cleaning, not himself or any surface, but something that was within the drain. He did this one wipe at a time by pulling them out. Sarah narrowed her eyes and tried to catch her breath as the knowledge dawned on her wetness. Spots of it that had dried up and become black were scattered around the pavement. Michael worked furiously, wiping evidence with the accuracy of someone who has done this many times before. The wipes came away stained blood as a result of his efforts. A tremor ran through Sarah's palms as she scrambled around for her phone. She never waited to find out what had bled there, or who had bled there. "You need to come now," she said as she phoned 911, her voice scarcely audible above a whisper. "There is a child, and I get a feeling that he is concealing something dreadful." Blood was not the only thing that the cops discovered when they arrived. He discovered dead corpses. The bones of 3 children who had gone missing were discovered hiding in the storm drain, wrapped in plastic and decomposing in the heat of Texas. All 3 of the youngsters were between the ages of 8 and 10. Each of them had been reported missing during the course of the previous half year. Both of them had disappeared without a trace. Where is Michael? Additionally, he was not just tidying up after himself, he was amassing materials. As the inquiry progressed, it was discovered that his bedroom had been transformed into a shrine using a twisted collage of newspaper articles about the children who had gone missing. Pieces of their hair that had been tucked into notebooks, and Polaroid photographs of them that had been taken before they vanished. However, what is the most unsettling finding? It wasn't simply for cleaning that the baby wipes were used. For the purpose of preserving the corpses, Michael had been utilizing them. so that they remain fresh. There was a complete lack of words from the psychologists who assessed Michael. It was just a cold, detached obsession with death that he displayed. He did not express any regret or fear. His response, which was bone-chilling, was given when he was asked why he did it. I wanted to see how long it would take for someone to notice. Michael, who was just 13 years old at the time, became the youngest prisoner in the maximum security jail in the state. His case was investigated by criminal profilers and discussed publicly in courtrooms. Was he born with a wicked disposition? Is it possible that something inside him was damaged beyond repair? There was one thing that was certain. Sarah's choice to accompany him that day prevents a murderer from continuing their work for an indefinite amount of time. Given that Michael had not yet finished, and if she hadn't taken action, a greater number of children would have disappeared. Purchases of more baby wipes would have been made. In addition, further blood would have been carried away into the drains of that solitary Texas hamlet, which were waiting in the shadows. This raises the question, how many more Michaels are there in the world, and who is keeping an eye on them? Shockwaves were sent through the tranquil hamlet of Texas when the news of Michael's detention was announced. When parents were holding their children more tightly, they looked over their shoulders at every person they did not recognize. Sarah worked in a grocery shop, which eventually turned into a gloomy landmark. It was a place where evil had sneaked in without being seen, again and again. Despite the fact that reporters crowded the area in search of answers, none was able to explain how a youngster of such a young age could have grown so terrible. The trial of Michael was a spectacle for the media. Experts in the field of law debated whether or not a juvenile of 13 years old could even appreciate the seriousness of his offenses. Prosecutors portrayed him as a heartless predator, but defense counsel, who were having a hard time humanizing him, said that he was a victim of serious mental illness that had not been recognized despite their best efforts. After then, however, the most unsettling truth of all came to light. Michael made a casual remark about the drain while he was being evaluated by a psychiatrist. He said, "I wasn't the first one who used the drain." In order to retrieve the cadaver dogs, the investigators went back to the abandoned repair shop. The history of the community would be rewritten as a result of what they discovered under the concrete. The canines discovered various decomposed corpses, some of which were numerous decades old, buried behind layers of soil and rusty metal. Michael had not been using the storm drain as a simple place to deposit his garbage. Long before he arrived, it had been used as a cemetery. There was a reopening of frozen case files. Reports of missing individuals from the 1980s and 1990s have been brought back to light. Some of the elderly residents of the community recalled the disappearances, which caused them to go pale when they were questioned. It's only that they never came to the realization that the truth was lying right under their feet. Had Michael been imitating someone else? Was he the one who made the decision to carry on the tradition after discovering the horrible history of the drain? Is it possible that he was instructed by an older individual, someone who has previously used the same method? What is the purpose of baby wipes? In Michael's chamber, the police discovered a letter that was written by hand and said, "They stay cleaner longer." Is there a specific reason why he was attempting to prevent the remains from decomposing? As for the Polaroids, what say you? There was more to the photographs of the victims than simply a snapshot. It was a posed example. Before they passed away, they had been staged by someone. As the media frenzy intensified, a long-standing rumor began to circulate among the locals. He was a mechanic who worked at that identical car shop many decades ago. There was a guy who worked there. Even though he was reserved and kept to himself, many believed that he had a special way with children. Then, Just like that, he disappeared. In the same way as the youngsters. Suddenly, Sarah, the lady who had been the one to expose Michael, began to have nightmares. She observed a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the drain, watching Michael brush away the blood. She saw this person in between the drain and the drain. Moreover, in those dreams, clearly the figure was beaming. If Michael wasn't acting alone, what would happen? What if he was only the most recent release of something that was far older? A situation that never really came to an end. Moreover, what if, at this same moment, another youngster is entering a shop and purchasing baby wipes, but nobody is thinking to inquire about it? How come? Sarah was unable to wind down. As soon as she closed her eyes, she saw it once more. The dark figure standing by the storm drain, its smile extending too far for comfort, and its hands resting on Michael's shoulders in a manner that was reminiscent of a proud father. It was just a dream, she reminded herself as she clenched her coffee cup so tightly that her knuckles became white. A different narrative was presented in the local newspaper that was sitting on the kitchen table. Second grave uncovered. 8 more bodies found near auto shop. It is 8. It's not simply the most recent victims. The ones from the 1980s are not the only ones. More mature, the age is much older. Sarah drove to the local archives, which were located in a musty basement chamber under the library. Their newspapers that had yellowed and property titles that had picked up dust were stored. The librarian, an old lady by the name of Edna, looked at her through spectacles that were half the size of a moon. "You're that girl from the grocery store, aren't you?" Edna had a question. The one who caught the boy. Sarah gave a little nod. "I am in need of information on the car shop. Who was the owner of it before it was left behind?" Edna's expression became more gloomy. "Why dig up old ghosts? Because they're not buried deep enough." Edna heaved a sigh as she guided her friend to a microfilm machine and inserted a fragile newsreel from the year 1963. Sarah's blood began to ice as she read the headline, "Local mechanic's son vanishes. Father claims he was taken by the well." A photograph was taken of a guy who was smiling while wearing coveralls that were smeared with oil and standing in front of the exact same auto shop. It was Walter Hargrove, who was his name. Aside from that, his kid had been the first person to vanish. As stated in the article, Walter continued to assert that his son, who was 9 years old at the time, had been called into the well behind their home, which was a rusty old pipe that flowed into the storm drains. As the ramblings of a guy who was mourning, the police disregarded it as meaningless. But later, additional children began to disappear without a trace, a couple times every several years, always close to the sea. Each and every time, immediately after Walter's allegation of hearing whispers from the pipes. Sarah shook her hands as she turned the page to the next piece, which was a brief obituary from the year 1978. The body of Walter Hargrove had been discovered inside of his store. He was lying on his back in a pool of engine oil, with a contented grin on his face. A stolen police report was used by Sarah to create a map of the disappearances. 1963, the year when Walter's son was born. In 1971, a young lady from the neighboring town was last seen in the vicinity of a drainage ditch. 2 boys went missing in 1985 as they were playing near an automobile dealership. A young person whose bicycle was discovered protruding against the storm drain in the year 1999 from 2016 until 2023. Michael's descendants, before being thrown away, each and every one of them had been kept. Engine oil was utilized by Walter. Baby wipes were taken by Michael. Methods that are distinct, the same insanity. During that particular evening, Sarah was seen standing in front of the abandoned auto shop, holding a can of gasoline in one hand and a flashlight in the other. In order to destroy the location, she intended to set fire to it. Then, however, there was a sound. Inside the pipes, there was a leak that was moist and slithering. Then, after that, Sarah, it was a whisper. A human being. It is not feasible. In spite of the heat in Texas, her breath was thick and hazy in the air. The torch made a flickering sound. At that moment, she caught a glimpse of a figure emerging from the shadowy opening of the storm drain. Extended fingers, a grin that is prolonged, and eyes that were excessively dark, excessively deep, and excessively eager. The focus of this was never just on Michael. Alternately, Walter. It was about the creature that had been hidden in the veins of the town, in the water, in the pipes, and in the areas where no one had thought to look. It said humbly, it imparted knowledge. In addition, it never failed to find someone fresh to clean up the mess. After dropping the gasoline, Sarah got up and bolted. However, the drain behind her beeped and gurgled, and what about the morning after that? There was a fresh pack of baby wipes sitting on the counter of the grocery shop, acquired by a young lady of 10 years of age.